my family moved to Ohio in 1945. But I started school when I was 5 years old because my older brothers, both of them was 3 and 4 years ahead of me, which means they were 3 or 4 years ahead of me in school. When they would bring their books home from school, I would listen and hear my mother teaching them, instructing them, and I picked up. So as a result, when it's time for me to go to school, I should have been 6, but actually they let me come at 5 because I was ahead because of my reading early on. So up until I became a senior in high school, I was always the youngest person in the class. And that's a whole other story. But from 1945, my family moved to Warren, Ohio, and where my dad had a job at Republic Steel. And he had previously lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
So before your parents moved to Ohio, what are your earliest memories of living in Alabama? Because I believe you used to pick cotton. Do you remember about those days? Do you remember? Tell me about your grandparents.
Well, both of my grandparents, my maternal and paternal grandparents, they were farmers. They were their primary business. My Grandpa Tom, on my daddy's side, he owned his property, several hundred acres of land, and he had sharecroppers. Sharecroppers were those people that came from other places, sometimes on the same farm, but they farmed for my granddaddy, Tom. And on my mother's side, Quentin Pryor, he leased his land from a man who eventually became head of the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama. But he leased his land, but when both of my grandparents were so-called wealthy, I can remember them talking about how they started the first school for black folks in Houston County. They built their own school. And it was a group of neighbors and homeowners and property owners, for the most part, who formed their own school to organize their own school for black folks. As a matter of fact, ultimately, some years later, my granddad on my mother's side bought the school bus and he drove the school bus. But both of them was very wealthy individuals. Matter of fact, also on my grandfather's side, who leased his land, he had sharecroppers also, and one of the families was a white family. And the white family was a young Caucasian man and wife, but the husband was a drunkard, and he was not putting his load in the field. So this is a story that's passed down through generations through the family. So my granddad went to his white landowner, and told him that this man was not putting his load and he wanted to get him off his farm. He said, "What you gonna do about that heifer?" Calling the white woman heifer. He said, "Well, she can stay because she works." And lo and behold, white man left, and I'm told that my grandfather sired a son by this white woman. As a matter of fact, he grew up with my mother and the rest of our brothers, and ultimately, when he got just about grown, he moved to Detroit. And eventually, all the family got together, years later. But it showed how things happened, back during that day.